educational system, chemicals and mind control systems that are used in the United States and have been used since 1953 on a massive level. It's just that it hasn't been told to the general public. But it has been used quite effectively by Walt Disney, among other characters. And, of course, he does a whole lot of homosexual embedding because he was gay, as you know. So a lot of that's involved in his cartoons. I didn't want to disillusion you. Y'all can still watch whatever that is. When he talks about fairy tales, that's what he's talking about. So we're going to talk about some of those things. But basically, the speed of what's going on has gone far beyond the old days when they used to use hypnotic flashes on commercials on the airplanes where they flash signals to you to increase you to buy food, and at the movies where they increase signals, they buy these signals in movies, and they embed them in the movies, and then you start eating more popcorn and sodas. But this is known as psychic communication. There's a whole industry devoted to just that. But it's gotten kind of high-tech now because they embed that on CDs before they print the music on it. It's already embedded on it. And they put that in computer games as well. It's hidden in the signals of those sounds that you think are innocent sounds that the children hear. And underneath of that are subliminal embeddings. If you slow down the sound, you can hear it. It's very softly spoken. But they have gotten to such a level where it's almost impossible to protect yourself. The best protection for it is to go into your culture, because if you keep going into European culture, there's no way you can defend yourself.
What's your name?
I think when we learn that how to define our situation properly, we can learn how to see the solution properly. We say we're free, which is rather colloquial expression to me. We are by no definition, according to the United States Constitution or United Nations laws, free at all. We are known as a captive race. We're held in captivity in America. They had us in chains, and they released the chains, but they didn't release us from captivity. The 13th Amendment did that. It did not free us. It just took the chains off of us, but we still remain in captivity. We, by definition, are in captivity because we're not able to practice our culture at all times and in all situations. That's what a free person can do. You can practice your culture at all times and in all situations. In other words, if your child does something wrong, the police would arrest your child and bring it to your community and say, y'all got it, and turn around and leave. That's what they used to do to the Chinese in Chicago. They did it to around 1970, because you never saw a Chineseman in jail. Very rarely. You can go to prison now and you very rarely see a Chinese person in jail. Because when a Chinese child does something wrong, the police arrest the child, don't take him to the police station. Picks up the child, brings him to the Chinese community, and that's it. If they have committed a murder or something like that, the child may be missing. But they know that the Chinese will take care of it. So the thing is, when you're able to practice your culture at all times in all situations, you are by definition free. What we follow is the rituals and ceremonies of the Europeans, and we call those the Constitution of the United States, and we call it law, and we call it economics, and we call it this and that. But these are just rituals and ceremonies that the Europeans have. If you do this, I'm supposed to do that. And if I don't do that, I haven't followed the ritual. But instead of saying you haven't followed the ritual, they say you have broken the law. They devise all these rituals for you to follow. If you don't follow them, you've broken the law. But actually what you haven't followed is their rituals and ceremonies. And that's principally what that big book, the United States Constitution, is all about. It's a book of rituals and ceremonies. So the thing we have to do is define our situation properly so we can find a solution properly. And the first thing we have to deal with is ourselves. We have to find out as a parent, as an adult, how do we learn? Because you're trying to teach a child something, but how do you learn? You have to know your learning skill and the child's learning skill that you're communicating with. There are 4 systems of learning. I'm going to be a little chalky right now. That is auditory. You can be an auditory learner as a parent. You can be a visual learner as a parent. Auditory learning is quite popular. Visual learning is quite popular. Auditory learners is someone like Llaila Afrika. That's auditory. You repeat this. Suppose you don't learn that way. then picking up a book about positive affirmation that you say every day doesn't mean anything to you because you are not an auditory learner. Why is it all the books are pushing auditory learning? Because the way to manipulate you and control you is auditory. That's why all the books are auditory. Say this and you'll have this. Say this and you'll have this. Why is Jerry Springer on television? Why is Jenny on television? Why is Montel on television? Why is Oprah on television? Why are they pushing all of this psychology at our children and at you? We call these cue systems. They're setting up a system of cues where you react a certain way when you hear a certain sound. So we have the auditory, we have the touch way, and we have the rhythm way for black people. Not to be confused with restoration. This is the rhythm system which everyone has they use to learn. A lot of people mix the systems together. Some things you learn auditory, some things you learn tactile. You mix them together. I'm going to ask you some basic questions, and you can check them off. And this is how you define which type of learner you are. I watch the speaker carefully. I prefer to observe rather than talk, and I tend to be quiet. I speak in simple, clear language. That's what a looker will be about. A looker watches me very carefully. An auditory learner will consider myself a good listener. You think you're a good listener? I love to talk and am very verbal. Do you have a motor mouth? You know. You say, no, I'm not that type. That's a listener. That person learns by listening. I excel in verbal expression. I have a large vocabulary. If you answered yes to that, you answered yes to two of them, at least that you're beginning to define whether you are an auditory learner, listener. Someone who learns by rhythm. I often touch the person I'm speaking to. I tend to express myself non-verbally using gestures. Oh yeah, now laugh at me. I have difficulty finding the right words to say. Now, if you can't define it that way, then you can look at your pastime activities and your hobbies. For someone who's visual, I enjoy games like Scrabble, Monopoly, and I can't even say the word. Thank you. Because when I was little, I didn't say Monopoly, I said Monopoly anyway. I couldn't figure the thing out. So I enjoy movies and television. I express myself with my hands through painting, crafts, or pottery. That person is a visual learner. An auditory learner, a listener, would do things like this. I like talking and listening in games like Password. I listen to records and tapes and read novels or poetry. I express myself verbally, talking or writing to friends. That's an auditory learner, someone who's into that rhythm stuff, touch. I prefer to be active and enjoy participating in sports. I like observing the action of ice hockey, races, rodeos, wrestling, and soccer. I prefer the full-body expression of dancing, gymnastics, and swimming. And that's someone who's more or less what we call tactile in my business, touch and rhythm learners. So if you answer those questions, then that can help you get into what kind of learner you are. An auditory learner will use auditory words. I hear what you're talking about. That didn't sound good to me. They use the words. They're telling you which way they learn. A visual learner say, I see what you mean. I see what you're talking about. That's clear to me, because they're a visual person. Someone who's into touch will say, I feel good about that. I don't feel I understand what you're talking about. They're using touch words. And someone into rhythm say, that's out of step. That didn't move me. That's slamming. They tell you what kind of learner they are. So if you listen carefully, you have to figure out what kind of learner are you and what kind of learner is the person you're communicating to. Because a lot of times we fail to communicate to our children because we're not picking up on which way they learn. We're trying to force them into a learning system that they cannot comprehend at all. I'm going to read something to you. As one psychologist said, One of the effects of self-esteem, that's outcome-based education programs, is that you are no longer obliged to tell the truth if you don't feel like it. Outcome-based education is what they use to teach the children in the schools of America. It makes your feelings more important than anything else. How you feel or how you expect to feel is the measure of your personality. Feeling is more important. McDonald knows that. The Burger King knows that. Have you ever learned anything nutritional from McDonald's? Information is not important. You're sold things based on your feelings. You're sold your clothes based on your feelings. As a group, as a racial group, black people speak on the telephone more, buy cars more, and buy clothes more, and cosmetics more than any other race. We are moved by our feelings. You don't have to tell the truth, because if the truth you have to tell is about your own failure, then your self-esteem will go down, and that is unthinkable. So you don't tell the truth if it's bad for you. Truth is something that you double thought now, or you double speak, as they say. There's two different values. You can say two truths and they can be in conflict, but the person's mind is no conflict. The newspapers are already naming the psychological signs parents and teachers should be looking for. They use such psychological words as lethargy, changes in environment. They may decorate their room all in black or go in for gang paraphernalia. You've seen this black color? Have you ever wondered why it's so much black? Black coats, black hats, black shoes. That is the color for the New World Order. Everyone knows it, even the wrestlers know it. When they come out and they say New World Order, they wear in black, because that's the color. Whenever there's a massive change, they always go to black. Look at Hitler. He had a group that wore all black, black boots, Gestapo. Whenever they're about a massive change, they always go to the black color. The real situation is that, see, they had a shooting in Arkansas that was in the papers, one of the major ones. The real situation is that Arkansas was the first state that introduced outcome-based education, a destructive psychiatric and psychological-based program. They introduced that in 1983. At the time, Arkansas was employing the service of National Outcome-Based Education, Ted Seitz of Brown University, with the help of a grant from the Withrow Rockefeller Foundation. In 1984, Arkansas also joined 4 other states as a pilot for relearning. This is rethinking. They're reordering the thinking process of the children, so now you don't have the program to talk to them. We're totally putting out in touch with of our children. We put out of the sphere of their program now. Now, this is an old picture of what a butterfly, where you hear the word psychiatry. Comes from psych, which comes from butterfly, which the Europeans believe that your soul is going to some kind of way find your mind and fly away. It's really weird. It's sort of like what you have with the Gemini twins. You have Costa and Palux. One was physical and one was a spirit, and the other one had to find his spirit, so it flew away and found the spirit. So the game of psychology is a game of spirituality. It's by definition always has been. It has nothing to do with your mind at all. It's a game about spirituality. If there's one thing we should have known as black people, if the Europeans say, look that way, turn around, and look that way, don't even question it. You should know that by now. Some things we just don't need to even get into questioning here. The blondes have more fun. You have been taught that, right? After blondes come redheads, and then the brunettes. But blondes have more fun. Why do they say blondes are so beautiful? Why do they say redheads are second? It's a chemical release called norepinephrine that bleaches the hair, makes the hair blonde, makes the hair red. The more norepinephrine you have, more likely you are to be blonde or red. The most violent person in the European races secrete more norepinephrine. They are praising the person that's the most violent. That's why blondes have more fun, because they know that person will off you in a minute. Because they have more violence because they secrete more norepinephrine. That's just chemistry. You think it's about beauty, they think it's about power and control. You're looking the wrong way. Turn around and look the other way. Now, when I was talking about mind control, I don't know whether you can see this or not, but I'm going to hold it up nonetheless. Now, what I have here is a little sheet with the word M-K-U-L-T-R-A. It's mind control. M for K, M for mind, K for control. Ultra control of the mind. This is a program introduced by the CIA in April the 13th, 1953. Funded by the CIA, the military, and the National Security Council. This program introduced what we call a sub-program called Monarch. They use psychology, movies, books, radiation, music, drugs, graphology, sex, mostly prostitution, homosexuality, teenagers and adolescents. The whole program is geared toward our youth. You say these things can't be going on. Not absolutely true. What happens when you're in a city is you become desensitized. There's so much noise here, you don't even hear the noise because you become desensitized to it. You don't even hear the sirens and the police cars after a while. You become callous to it. You lose your sensitivity to touch your outer environment, so you lose your sensitivity to touch your inner environment. You become desensitized. If someone next to you gets shot, you say, oh, that happens every day. So you no longer begin to react to violence and death because that's all you see on televisions, in the movies, on computer games. So the objective is to desensitize you by keeping you in captivity in an urban environment. But we are not paying any attention to that. If you look like, well, I live on a little island, it's rather quiet and all that. So when I come into some place like, Philadelphia or something like that, it's really like, wow. It's like takes your breath away. The radiation, getting a headache from passing by those tanks you have that you see on those tanks give off a lot of radiation. And it kind of like it makes my nerves tingle. So it takes a while to get used to all this stuff. But I'm always glad to go back home. But nonetheless, what I'm talking about, you're around it so much. The sounds, you're around the color abuse, the music abuse. Someone rolled up beside the train and the whole train shook. And I knew it was her brother with that thing in the, whatever they got in the back of the car. And the whole, we're just on the whole coach on the train shaking because something, I didn't have to look. I knew it was a brother. That develops pinholes in the eardrum. And that person will lose at least about it. They've tested them in 1980, and 70% of the college students already had a hearing impairment. And it's increased with black students as well. So we become very desensitized, which leads to suppressed feelings of rage and anger. People become angry because they can't express themselves. You can never express your true feelings to people. You may meet them on the street and say, are you having a nice day? How do you feel? And they say, what's just none of your business. They're going to get hostile on you. So you're not even able to express even a kind thought. You see? So all this is being constantly suppressed in you, but it has to be released somehow. Some kind of way it has to be released. And it's released through anger with each other because we turn it towards each other instead of toward where the anger is coming from. We always direct it toward each other and not outside of ourselves. That's the whole objective of being urbanized. It wasn't set up this way otherwise because long ago they would keep us in little areas. They would have Salem, Roanoke, but now they just bring us into one pocket, build military highways around us. Those are highways with walls on them. Have you ever seen these highways with walls on them? That's known as a military highway. You cannot escape. Once they block off the exit, you cannot escape. That's why the wall is around it. And they practice what we call a Rambo training. They have Rambo training in Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, and New York. That's where the military comes in the city because they can't duplicate the environment. So they train right in the city for urban warfare. It's all in Philly, all over the cities. They call that Rambo training. So you're used to seeing these things. So what happens when the feelings get suppressed? People tend to have an exaggerated response. A little thing and they get ticked off. You say, why are they getting ticked off? They have an exaggerated response to just little things. Hello, how you feel? None of your business. You say, Dad, you know, where did this come from? Because of the suppression, the feeling has to be released, and when it's released, it's exaggerated. So we're just turning on each other, but this causes what we call neurotic condition, anxiety, depression. You hear all this St. John's wort on television. Depression. St. John's wort is used for depression. So we beginning to see a lot of medicine and a lot of things coming on television. Say, wonder where all this is coming from. Why is it selling like hotcakes? Because we have a lot of depression, a lot of unreleased feelings in us. And then we have the subliminal embedding in the commercials, on television, subliminal embedding on this, what you call elevator music, just psychology music. We have subliminal embedding on the movies, where they buy the time to flash a message to you on the screen that you don't see, because you think you're seeing the image constantly, but it's coming at impulses. It's a flash, constant flashing. And by altering the flash, you can do what they call hypnotize a person. The way you hypnotize a person is alter their breathing. You always alter the breath, the spirit, which you call in-spirit and ex-spirit, or inspire and expire, which comes from spirit. So you alter the spirit, you alter the rhythm by altering the pulse of the image that's flashed on the screen. The image that's flashed on the CD. The image that's flashed, you alter it. How do you feel? Don't you feel good? Why don't you take a deep breath? Now you can breathe out. Why don't you breathe in? Don't you hear the birds? Isn't that nice? Oh. And see, you're slowing down the person. Every time you talk, you just keep slowing them down. And once you slow them down, you'll change their breath. You breathe out. And you breathe in the universe. You breathe in the universal spirit that gives you power. Now breathe in that spirit. Now breathe out all your anger and frustration. Now breathe in all the joy. Now breathe in all the unhappiness. You see? I'm altering your breathing. Now I can get you. Now, why don't you watch the way I move my arm? I'm moving it over here. It releases anger. I move it over here. It brings in happiness. You are following me. Doesn't it make you feel wonderful to be with a group of black people and you have your own night? I'm kidding. I didn't want to. Some of y'all were getting into it. So all of this is done now by pulses. Now, you take, for instance, we have these sociological definitions for behavior. Long ago, we had what we call drapetomania. Drapetomania is the mental illness that causes a slave to run away. A bona fide mental illness in this country. Yes, I think it was in 1783 when another mental illness we had what we call nigritude. Nigritude is a disease that causes black people to be black. Because they believed that we had a disease similar to leprosy that caused us to be black, and they call it nigritude. It was similar to having an attitude, except you have color. So you have a nigritude, and that was classified as a mental illness. But before then you had drapetomania, which meant you were mentally ill, and that caused you to want to run away from slavery. Now this whole thing is sick, but all this is social definitions for our behavior. Then when you ran away and you got caught, you were arrested for stealing yourself. I'm telling you, these are just social terms that are used to label our behavior. And once our behavior is labeled, then we're able to be processed into the system. And then we'll be better able to be controlled.